thank you very much. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be sitting here in front of you today to talk to you about something very near and dear to my heart, and it's how do we make this a reality, right? How do we move from this being a fringe technology to this becoming a reality, and how does this impact financial institutions? I'm honored to be joined on stage by Ola and Geoff, both of them titans in this industry. Give them a big round of applause, everyone. What we've seen in crypto over the past year is unprecedented, and I say that from a first-hand point of view because I'm approaching my decade in crypto, which really crypto works like dog years, so it's like 50 years experience in this space. And what we've seen last year as absolutely unprecedented. But with that, we've seen advancements and we've seen adoption like we never did before, particularly here in the UAE. The UAE has become the center of this entire ecosystem, the global ecosystem, with today being the fastest growing ecosystem in the world. Ola, you've been in this space before anyone, for all intents and purposes, here in the UAE. BitOasis had a lot of the difficult conversations before anyone else did. Two financial institutions, and how do you believe that financial institutions can be more positive towards this entire space? From your experience, if you can share a little bit.
Great. Thank you, Saqr. I'm glad to be here with you and Geoff and everyone here in the room. It's great to see the energy, specifically here in Dubai. Not just obviously Dubai FinTech Summit, but a lot of the very positive regulatory developments that have been happening across Dubai and the UAE. Definitely Dubai is trying to position itself and to a very large extent already achieved that status being a global crypto hub, where we're seeing a lot of the largest crypto players in the industry looking to set up shop here. On that note, we're very glad to also be the first to get the regulatory licenses under VARA, Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority. Again, a very progressive move from Dubai to establish a crypto-specific regulator to ensure the industry is properly supervised, regulated, and allow the industry to really flourish in a regulated manner. I think I'll take that as a segue to talk more about us, obviously, as a crypto operator, being the first to launch here in the UAE. We're the largest crypto platform in the region in terms of volumes, the largest here in the UAE in terms of volumes and user bases as well. And we take our role very seriously as being a pioneer in this industry to grow the ecosystem and not just to grow our business. And with that, since the early days of BitOasis, my focus and the team's focus has always been that we need to move together and we need to work with different stakeholders to ensure that we open up the industry and we provide a safe and trusted and regulated way for retail and institutional clients to have safe, regulated access to crypto assets. And with that, obviously, naturally, it meant that this industry and crypto operators and players, particularly centralized platforms, so in that way, the brokerages, the exchanges, and the custodians have to be regulated and regulated in a way that allows the technology to also flourish. So we've been among the first, obviously, to engage with different regulators here in the UAE. Now, obviously, we're engaging in different regulators across the region as well. UAE obviously being one, Saudi, across the GCC and Bahrain. We've gotten principal approval for licenses there as well. Pakistan, Egypt, to replicate the work that we've done here in the UAE. The most important thing is ensuring there's proper clarity and regulation that allows operators like us, but other people building various applications, to actually be regulated and supervised. And with that, it would create a trusted environment for different financial institutions to also participate, collaborate, and partner up with different crypto players to essentially bring that innovation to more traditional financial services. The other thing that we've seen work really well here in the UAE, and also I think is going to start sort of happening in other jurisdictions, is that regulators also providing that trust to other financial institutions, that the frameworks that they have established are robust, They're
Right.
transparent, providing the right infrastructure for financial institutions to come in by following, obviously global standards and standards that other traditional financial services also follow in terms of regulation. I'll just stop here. Obviously, this topic is very, very large, and I know Geoff has a lot to also provide here.
And you provided the perfect segue because you stopped at financial services, and the last I checked, Standard Chartered is one of the larger players in this space. With that, you're actively working within the industry. How have you seen Standard Chartered's point of view change from where it was to where it is today, and what is it today, actually?
Sure. So, look, I think Standard Chartered has been quite public about the fact that we really do see distributed ledger technology, blockchain, being a very important part of the future financial system. That being said, we have to balance the fact that we play a very important role today in the existing financial system. And so all of our investments and innovation and attempts to use the new technology have to be done very considerately, slowly, and with the blessing of our regulators.
Right.
And what I would say is that over the course of the last 2-3 years, we've obviously gone live with a few ventures like Zodia Markets and Zodia Custody. We've obviously announced today that we're going to be trying to launch digital asset custody in the UAE as from within the core bank.
Oh, wait, hold on. I missed that. That's an announcement that went out today?
So
that you will provide custody in the UAE?
We have announced an MOU that we're going to be looking at trying to build a digital asset custody product in the UAE, subject to governance and regulatory approvals.
Wonderful.
So we have to, what has changed over the last 2-3 years is obviously the nature and quality of that conversation, both internally and with our external stakeholders, has advanced tremendously. I think the overall knowledge of the space and what blockchain technology brings has changed dramatically. I think, quite frankly, crypto has been a rather unwelcome distraction to the benefits that blockchain could bring to a lot of what we do today. So I would say that, if anything, I expect the momentum for what Standard Chartered Bank, and I expect many of our peer banks to be doing in this space, is going to accelerate from here.
That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing this announcement. That's a very big deal for us, right? So again, the UAE is taking center stage even for Standard Chartered. That's great to know. Now, both of you mentioned regulation. And mind you, I think wide-scale adoption will only arrive when we have proper regulation. Having said that, I want to throw a bit of a curveball out there, right? The financial services industry is as old as time. In the way we know it today, probably around 150 years old. Regulations around the financial service industry are some of the most robust of any other industry around there, right? We still see unfortunate events, without pointing towards one or the other, where the regulations fail. How much can regulations really do for us in the crypto space if we haven't been able to do them right in the financial services space? Ola, starting with you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Saqr. And I'm seeing, obviously, more and more panels talking about regulation. That's a very positive thing, especially knowing the global context and some of the events that happened last year and to some extent have continued happening in the first quarter of this year. So I think let's sort of maybe just give a broad view of what's going on now in the industry. I do think we have to sort of take a reflection or self-reflect on where we are right now. Obviously 2022, to a certain extent, beginning of 2023 has been a very tough year for crypto. I think we're seeing some of that ripple effect, some crypto-related and not as well, in the banking industry. A lot of that is more macro-driven with higher interest rates. And I think in late 2022, obviously, with some of the fallouts that we've seen in the industry, FTX obviously been one. Before that, there was Luna, 3AC. I mean, it's sort of like a domino effect, right? With over leverage and all of that. There's been a loss of trust, not just from regulators. I know we're talking about regulators here, but loss of trust from consumers, financial institutions, obviously, that work with crypto companies, different stakeholders, and then most specifically, obviously, the regulators, to an extent that people started understanding the scale of this industry, the fact that this industry will continue growing, and it's not some sort of fad or a trend that is going to go away, and more specifically that for this industry to continue growing in a safe way, regulators have to be very proactive and make sure that the right frameworks are in place. And this is happening globally, right? We're not just talking here in the UAE. Now, different regulators have reacted to this in different ways. So I think obviously in the US, and obviously some of that has been FTX driven, some of it obviously I think the fallout of Silvergate as well, which was also sort of dependent on some of that domino effect that happened in crypto. And then obviously other banks to a larger extent is unrelated. So we started seeing in the US, or the policy reactions, is regulation through enforcement. So a lot of the, I think, actions that we've seen SEC conduct in the US. While you started seeing other jurisdictions, Dubai being one of them, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, obviously Bahrain, we're seeing other jurisdictions as well globally, really sort of taking the lead and putting in the right frameworks in place and ensuring there's proper regulatory frameworks that enables this industry to grow. And with that, obviously, you'll start seeing more and more jurisdictions wanting to regulate, either to open up this industry and bring in larger players and become competitive, and others obviously taking other actions for other reasons.
But Ola, I really want to push for an answer there. I mean, will regulation solve the adoption element? Will regulation allow us to start growing? Or is everyone just running after regulation? And really, if we compare to the financial services industry, it isn't protecting much when things start really failing.
So I think that's a very good question. And I think regulation is not sort of like a switch that you switch on and then it's going to solve all problems, right? So I think the situation is more complicated than that. If you want to take some of the examples, like the fallouts that happened in the industry, to some extent it was lack of regulation or very weak regulation.
Or none at all.
Exactly. And then arbitrage, regulatory opportunities, where there are gaps in regulations that allow certain players that have a very short-term view on this industry and sort of trying to sort of maximize their businesses or the value created by the business for the wrong reasons, taking advantage of those regulatory arbitrage opportunities. There is a need for a global call for action to regulate across all jurisdictions where there is commonality on best practices of how this industry has to be regulated, to eliminate some of those gaps that certain players, across all industries, right? Not just crypto, but you've seen this in emerging industries. Whenever there's an arbitrage opportunity, someone is going to come and take advantage of that, or lack of regulation. And that has to be eliminated for consumer protection and then other reasons as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ola. I want to play this back to you, Geoff.
Look, I think it's fundamentally an unreasonable expectation that regulation will stop all bad behavior. Right. That's true in finance, that's true in every single industry. And look, I think it's, I think it's probably unusual for me to take the regulator side here, but look, we all would like regulatory clarity and certainty. This is not an easy problem, and nor is it helped if regulators rush to bring out regulations that are poorly thought out that they then have to subsequently change. So I think it's entirely reasonable that regulation is taking time to form. Now, of course, we would like all our global regulators to approach the problem in the same way. Clearly, that is not happening, and that is a source of frustration. But from our perspective, being a globally regulated entity, we do believe that a strong regulatory environment creates a system and culture of trust. Mm-hmm. And whilst blockchain technology, certainly the maximalists would love to evangelize about decentralization, the technology itself doesn't necessarily change human psychology or behavior.
Right.
Humans still will gravitate towards trusted parties to do their business. Right. Whether that be high quality exchanges, whether that be high-quality asset managers or high-quality banks. We want to be a high-quality bank that operates responsibly in this space. And we want to do that in partnership with our regulators.
I want to stick with you there for a second, Geoff. You're coming out of Singapore. Singapore became one of the first countries in the world to start actively working with the crypto space. You have a global hat where you look at the entire world. Where would you call out some of the leading regulators in the world that are actively working with this space? And feel free to push the UAE here. We're in the UAE.
Gosh, that's a spiky question, having to pick my favorite regulator. Look, I think it's very clear that in some of the markets in Asia where there's already been, I guess what one would call kind of global regulatory equivalents, they've been quite quick to come out with regulations regarding crypto. So Singapore and Hong Kong specifically come to mind. I think as we go further west, I think the UAE, specifically Dubai and Abu Dhabi, stand out for being quite forthright with a regulatory framework. I think Europe obviously has just passed MiCA. Now it's not without its flaws, but it is a very, very good starting point for a lot of people in that bloc. I think the big question mark at the moment is the US, where you have the SEC running off in a different direction, it seems, from a lot of other global regulators, and in fact, from other regulators within the US. And I think that, with the US being, the largest economy in the world, where with its currency being the predominant currency in the world. For now, that makes it very tricky for global banks, global asset managers to know exactly how to proceed. So I would like to see the US come out with a clearer framework. I'm sure we'll get there. It might be messier than we'd like, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah, the US is clearly taking the messy route, but let's see where this results into. Ola, you've actively worked with regulators, and I think also here in the UAE, we're blessed with the regulators wanting to listen to us. If you could highlight, and we're approaching the end of the panel, if you could highlight 2 to 3 areas that you believe every regulator around the world should start considering when it comes to crypto.
Yep. I think the panel became focused on regulation.
Well, it is financial services adoption.
Exactly, that I hope actually regulators are perhaps in the room or in the event and listening to what different operators, being crypto exchanges or banks, are actually calling for. So yes.
I'm happy to switch the question if you...
No. Let's stay on the regulatory question. I think it's very, very important. So yes, as a crypto operator and being the first here in the region, and also obviously we're a business that is also looking to expand and works with different regulators across the region. What we focused on is ensuring there are best practices and there's commonality, right? To grow a business and ensure that it's regulated is very difficult if every regulator or jurisdiction starts adopting a very different regulatory framework. So that's like number one, ensuring commonality among best practices. The other thing is, obviously there's always focus on AML, CTF, financial crime. Obviously there's a focus on ensuring that there's the right activities in terms of categories of different platforms that get regulated, and most importantly, consumer protection, right? And ensuring there are local client money accounts, and specifically if you're a business that runs on-ramps and off-ramps, and focus on ensuring the right local custody as well. And it's actually really great news that Standard Chartered is looking to roll out custody focused on the UAE market. And ensuring that consumer protection is localized and onshore is a very important thing. And I think this is where, even us as an operator, we went to regulators and we asked them that you need to make sure that you partnered up with us as regulators so we can bring in financial institutions into the crypto space, because this has to be a multi-stakeholder approach. Right. The ecosystem is not going to grow by just crypto companies rolling out or launching decentralized applications. Again, we're seeing some of that happening, but essentially the centralized platforms that are providing the on-ramps and the off-ramps, the custody, the brokerages, the exchanges, have to be properly regulated, and they need to make sure they have the right partnerships with financial institutions to establish that. And with that, the ecosystem has to work together and adopt a multi-stakeholder approach.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ala. Geoff, you said something that really shows me you're a man after my own heart. You said not crypto, but blockchain. And if you ask me, I think financial services can benefit a lot from the technology, not necessarily crypto in the long run. I think this is one thing, but blockchain is an entire piece. Can you tell us a little bit about the use cases in this space, not necessarily only with Standard Chartered, but the use cases that you see in the space for blockchain?
Sure. Perhaps I'll take a slightly more kind of macro thematic view and then maybe zoom back into a couple of things we're looking at a little bit more near term. Look, I think the world in many ways is becoming more connected, yet at the same time you have a broader political trend towards greater economic nationalism. That poses several challenges. Now, economic nationalism we tend to think about in terms of things like trade wars, tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think one of the very difficult problems that we as a banking industry are facing, and I think many of our clients are facing as well, is data nationalism. Mm-hmm. Now, this is really at odds with kind of how we think about global businesses being run, right? What is the opportunity for blockchain, zero-knowledge proof, to help simultaneously solve for the problem of data nationalism, yet actually support greater kind of global coherence around data? I think that's kind of one of the big problems that I think unless you're really kind of deep in the weeds of this problem, you kind of don't really know about. But I think it's one of the big things that blockchain could potentially help us solve as an industry. Drilling down a bit more near term for the things that we think are interesting. So obviously we've launched with a custody product already through Zodia Custody. We have a Zodia Markets business which has a brokerage and exchange. And I think the next thing for us is to really start drilling down to proper use cases around wholesale large value payments cross-border. Right. So we are an investor in a scheme called Partial with a few other banks that looks to leverage distributed ledger technology for essentially call it, I guess, the next generation of correspondent banking. And the other thing that is particularly of interest to me at the moment is really around collateral management and the movement of collateral around the financial system. Today, all banks, and I think a lot of our clients have to essentially over-capitalize and maintain very large buffers because of the current way in which risk is managed, which is typically on an end-of-day basis. Now, if we move to a world where we can truly manage risk real-time on a 24/7 basis, there are dramatic improvements in terms of counterparty risk. Right. And I think counterparty risk is, become a lot more in vogue with the recent episode with the regional banks in the US.
Wonderful. Well, we've made it through an entire panel without saying FTX, so I just had to say it, right? The Dubai FinTech Week brings together thought leaders from all around the world. We have someone with a global hat and someone with a super hyper local hat here with us. Although I'm in this space, I learned something in this. If it wasn't for anything, we've learned that Standard Chartered now provides custody in the UAE. With that,
almost, not quite yet.
Well, the announcement is out, right? With that, join me in giving a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much for joining us.